Okay, so Spellmonger Cadet, Book 1, Hawkmaiden. For anyone wondering why I took so long to start reviewing this series, it's mostly because I have a friend who hasn't read any of these books, and I wanted to see if they held up without having read the series proper. And you'll be gratified to know that they do. My friend Amanda had nothing but positive things to say about it, that it was a good story and she was into it and the world was all good. So if you're wondering if this series holds up without having to actually read the other ones, it does. I could see how you could prefer this series over the other one, over the mainline series, because there's a lot less overtly sexual references in this. So it's probably going to be a lot better for somewhat younger audiences. If you're like in middle school or something and want to write a report on it, it would probably play a little better. Or if you have kids who you want to get into this series, this would be a decent start. It completely holds up, and part of that is just down to the structure being a bit more typical for what you usually see in like a fantasy setting. So it starts with the lone. It's usually a farm boy, but with, one notable difference in this case. That person goes off and gets apprenticed to a wizard in some way because they're special in some way, and then, they get to go on all these grand adventures and yada yada yada. So it's a lot more of the traditional fantasy story that you typically see in Elizabeth Moon's Sheep Farmer's Daughter is like this. The Wheel of Time, as I already mentioned, The Wizard's First Rule, and no, I'm never reviewing that series. Hell, The Hobbit. But in that, I would say that I find Dara a lot interesting than more of your standard fantasy protagonist, due to, the simple fact that she is, on some level, a contrarian. She seems to always buck against tradition, and seems to try and do things pretty much in spite of what everyone expects or desires from her. I don't want to make it seem like I think she's pig-headed about this sort of thing, but she does seem to have a simple sort of situation. You think I can't do this? Well, screw you. Best exemplified at the beginning of the book here, when the first act is really her getting her bird, Frightful. And that has, kind of mixes the standard metaphor of climbing a mountain to show that this person can overcome great obstacles. I mean, that's kind of the metaphor, right? As well as combining that with, a metaphor about how the sky, is ultimately about freedom. There's always been an association with flight being free. As I've mentioned before, Brendan Sanderson does this a lot in his works. So the metaphor about her trying to climb an insurmountable obstacle to gain her freedom. But anyway, after that whole ordeal happens, this is when I think it's the beginning of the book High Mage or Mage Lord. I cannot recall. And all the results that come from that. I think it's interesting to see the world from the point of view of somebody who is so vastly different. So we've seen this position, and we've seen Seven Door from the eyes of our main character in the mainline series, Min, but it's also interesting to see this, how the peasantry kind of feels about this new interloper, the new guy, and what they have to say about him. And, there's clearly some trepidation about the new guy, but overall it seems to be somewhat positive. You see a lot more of the worry about the war that we saw in, again, I can't remember if it's High Mage or Mage Lord, which in the actual mainline series is treated not really as a big deal, but to Dara, who has never seen anything else, this is oh my gosh, there's a war going on. This is a big deal. In actuality, it's only kind of. But on that note, one thing I did notice while I was reading this is there's a little bit more time and attention put into the, the yeoman, which I think he serves as a great example of certain aspects of how people deal with things that we don't like about humans, but are nevertheless a part of human nature. And what I mean by that is that he has this, So before Min shows up, the yeoman Raylan the Steady is this very important figure because he is constantly standing up to Sire Kusi. And he treats himself, and he, enjoys that reputation within the society. But when Min shows up and makes everything better for everyone, you'd think this character would like that, right? But he doesn't. And this is because humans as a social species tend to jockey for status in some way. So when he loses his oppressor, he loses his status, and that makes him act out in certain ways, in very negative ways. Despite the fact that everything's better, like from a material standpoint, Raylan loses status. That is a keen observation on people that I don't see in a lot of other fantasy works that I've seen, and I've just felt like pointing that out. I'm not going to give real life examples. I got way too political on my last video, and I'm just not going there. But more on focus. Obviously, at some point, Dara finds out that she's a mage, or she has Rajira, or however you want to put it. Point is, she's special in some way. And and her kind of special gift with this ends up being that she's a beastmaster, which means she can kind of talk to animals. Not really talk, but it's interesting. I think that this does a very good job of getting us into the mind of an animal in some way, because animals wouldn't necessarily see the world in the same way that you or I do. And I think this does a good, and I feel like the writing behind, when Dara's writing behind Frightful's eyes, does a very good job of showing that that animals don't think in the same way that you do. We might recognize an emotion in them as being, a decisive negative if we saw it in another person, like having a huge ego or being too proud, I guess would be the more correct way to say it, as being a bad thing. But animals don't really share a lot of these. And I found a lot of the description behind that to be pretty interesting. I imagine Terry looked into what do Hawk's eyes see better than human eyes, and what do human eyes see differently, and knowing the difference between those two things to get that kind of writing down. I mean, obviously, I think Hawks see movement a little better than human beings, but humans are better at outlining shapes. Despite the name Eagle Eye, humans actually have some of the best eyesight in the animal kingdom, believe it or not. Thank the snakes, if you're wondering why. So that element of beast mastery, where it's talking to the animals, but it's kind of not. It's more of a connection of emotion, if you catch my drift. But anyway, this all ends with, and I'm not counting this as a spoiler because it's the name of the series, Dara becoming Min's apprentice, mostly through the beast mastery. The entire kind of twist here thing, it's like, these are these big, powerful war mages, and it's kind of, these are these big, important mages all going after this one thing so that they can get a reward. But it's not the, super awesome mages. It's the person who goes, well, why don't we just do this?
How do you decide between crunchy and soft tacos?
¿Por qué no los dos?
It's another example of, it's not the use of power, it's the application of power that is powerful, that is useful. So yeah, anyway, I think this was a great addition to the Spellmonger's world, and it's, and I don't know if Terry plans on doing any more than these 3, but, if he does, I'll gladly read them.
I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!